Today, you were presented with several scenarios presenting arguments about young people nowadays. You were asked to examine how these arguments were derived. In unpacking the problem statement today, you might have asked the following questions. What is an argument? What types of arguments are there? You would have discovered by solving today's problem that there are two main types of arguments, namely inductive and deductive arguments. Other questions you might have asked includes, so what are inductive and deductive arguments? Why do we need to differentiate the type of reasoning used in an argument? What arguments were presented in the problem statement and how were they made? So, what is an argument? Some of you in your research today would have discovered that basically an argument is a reason or set of reasons leading to a conclusion. Now, argument can be broken up into two basic elements, premises and a conclusion. And there are two types of argument, inductive arguments and deductive argument. These diagrams illustrate the different types of arguments. For inductive argument, we would carry out observations of specific instances in order to form some sort of pattern or generalizations. For example, you observe that your first year facies are nice, so you make a conclusion about all RP staff are nice. Here you rely on observations of specific instances of first year facies in order to make a conclusion about the general population of RP staff being nice. For deductive argument, your basis for reasoning is built firstly upon some principles, universal laws or theories that are deemed to be true. Then you go about making observations or collecting evidence in order to prove that the theory is true. For example, a universal law of nature would be something like all trees have roots. Next, we go about observing different kinds of trees, example, apple trees, angsana trees, etc., to see if they indeed have roots in order to form our conclusion. Hence, for inductive argument, we take numerous specific instances to create a general rule or to apply to a general population. Because this approach relies on the accumulation of more and more observations, the conclusion can only follow the premises with probability. On the other hand, for deductive argument, since we build our line of reasoning from the basis of a set of rules or laws or theories, and if the specific observations support these theories, then the subsequent conclusion must follow these premises with certainty. In other words, a deductive reasoning or argument is one which the conclusion follows necessarily or with certainty from the premises. An inductive argument is an argument in which it is thought that the premises provide reasons supporting the probable truth of the conclusion. So in an inductive argument, the premises are intended only to be so strong that if they are true, then it is unlikely that the conclusion is false. Take for example, here, Peter has always gotten A in science module for the past 14 lessons. So I am quite sure he will get A in week 15 also. It's because we have observed Peter having gotten A in his science over the past 14 weeks. This observation would be strong enough to conclude that he will surely get an A in week 15 too. This is an example of an inductive form of argument. So the two main types of arguments found in today's problem statement were inductive argument and deductive argument. However, you may have already noticed many statements about the traits of young people nowadays came from generalizations or inductive form of argument. In fact, most arguments are inductive in nature. Here's an example of an inductive line of reasoning from today's problem. See here that premise 1 is an observation of a specific instance of a young student stabbing his professor. Hence, if premise 2 is true about stabbing being a violent and impulsive act, then we can attempt a conclusion or generalization here that young people are violent and impulsive. Here's an example of a deductive line of reasoning. We start off with some factual data collected from research. Here, it is unwillingness to work long hours shows that workers are not resilient. Then we make specific observations about young workers not willing to work long hours. Since the line of argument is built on a fact, then the conclusion that young workers are not resilient must follow the premise with certainty. So now you know what is an argument and what are the types of arguments, namely inductive and deductive arguments. You will gain a better understanding of how a conclusion is derived in an argument, and this will help you to establish and critically evaluate the quality of the argument. This in turn helped you to become a better problem solver as you consider the arguments for and against a certain issue. So in summary, today we learned how to identify the premises and conclusion of a given argument, differentiate between inductive and deductive arguments, and explain how conclusions are derived through a process of logical interpretation of context that requires inductive or deductive reasoning. So, where are we now in the IAIA framework? We are into the final phase of the IAIA framework. Today we covered the first problem in the argument phase, and we learned how to, number 1, break down or form arguments in premise-conclusion form. Number 2, identify and construct inductive and deductive arguments. There will be 2 more problems coming up in the argument phase. Thanks for the active participation today, and I'll see you next week for problem 10.